All right, let's just dive right into this explainer. If you're prepping for the UGC Geography exam, look, I get it. You probably feel like you're being asked to literally memorize the entire planet. It's a lot. But today, we're going to take that massive, frankly intimidating syllabus and transform it into a super clear, logical journey.
So, our starting point is the official UGCNET guide itself. It lays out 10 incredibly dense units. And let's be real, if you just try reading this thing top to bottom, you're on a one-way trip to Burnout City. So rather than treating it like some rigid, unbreakable list, we're going to synthesize all 10 of those units into a much more manageable, strategic roadmap for your studies.
To pull this off, we've grouped the whole shebang into 5 thematic buckets. First, exploring the physical Earth. Second, environment and human systems. Third, economy, culture, and politics. Fourth, history and geographical techniques. And finally, fifth, the geography of India.
Okay, let's hit our first bucket, exploring the physical Earth. This is where we build the physical foundations of the planet by combining units 1, 2, and 3.
Now, quick pro tip here. Don't just memorize random facts. Group them conceptually. You start with the endogenetic forces shaping landforms in geomorphology. Definitely pay attention to the geomorphic cycles from Davis and Pank. Then you look up into the sky with climatology, tracing atmospheric circulation and the heat budget. And finally, you follow how those atmospheric winds actually drive oceanography, things like ocean currents and salinity. See how it all connects? The land affects the air, and the air, well, it affects the sea.
And honestly, understanding these physical forces is exactly why this matters. The exam isn't just testing if you know old weather patterns. No way! You literally cannot answer high-yield questions on modern global climate change without mastering the physical mechanics first, things like El Niño, La Nina, and atmospheric circulation. The testers want to see that you actually grasp the root causes before you start talking about global impacts.
Moving right along to bucket number 2, environment and human systems. This is where we synthesize units 4 and 5 by bringing actual human beings into the picture.
For this part of the exam, you're going to need to critically compare some pretty foundational demographic theories, like how did Malthus view population growth compared to, say, Ricardo or Sadler? But hey, it doesn't just stop at theory. You've got to track how these populations actually settle. You'll trace the shift from rural issues, like land acquisition, all the way to super complex urban systems, which means mastering frameworks like Christler's central place theory and the rank size rule.
So what's the big takeaway? Basically, human settlement inevitably impacts the ecosystems we just covered. That's why the syllabus specifically calls out major international frameworks you absolutely must know. We're talking the Brundtland Commission, the Kyoto Protocol, Agenda 21, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Paris Agreement. You need to know what they are, sure, but more importantly, how they try to fix the environmental hazards caused by things like global warming and urban heat islands.
All right, bucket 3, economy, culture, and politics. Diving into units 6 and 7, we're looking at how human populations organize themselves on a macro level.
If you remember just one thing about this section, make it this. It is heavily model-driven. You absolutely have to be ready to explain spatial organization using specific frameworks. Like, you need to understand von Thunen's model for agricultural land use, and Weber's theory on why industries locate where they do based on transport costs. And on the political side, make sure you can break down big geopolitical concepts like the Heartland and Rimland theories.
You know, what's genuinely fascinating about this part of the syllabus is the sheer scale of it. It basically asks your brain to act like a zoom lens. In one breath, you're zooming way in on specific cultural health metrics or the spatial distribution of tribes and castes in India. And then, bam, you're zooming all the way out to analyze the geopolitics of world natural resources and climate change. You really have to get comfortable seamlessly shifting between that micro-social level and the macro-political level.
Okay, getting close to the end. Bucket 4, history and geographical techniques. Before we apply everything to our final case study, Units 8 and 9 cover the history of the discipline and the cartographer's toolkit.
Unit 8 is like a giant time machine. You have to chronologically trace the evolution of geographic thought itself. You'll start way back with the ancient Greek, Roman, Arab, Chinese, and Indian scholars. From there, you'll see how Charles Darwin's theories completely flipped geographic thought on its head. And then you'll follow the timeline right into modern paradigm shifts, navigating the quantitative revolution, positivism, and eventually hitting postmodernism and feminism in geography.
Then we hit Unit 9, which is all about the actual geographical techniques. The exam expects you to know the nitty-gritty sequential steps behind spatial tools. Take GPS, for instance. It's not enough to just know what the acronym stands for. You have to understand exactly how the space segment talks to the ground control segment and how that data gets processed by the receiver segment. And you can expect that same level of technical depth for GIS data formats and remote sensing too.
Now listen to me carefully. Do not let the math scare you. I know it sounds intense, but the syllabus explicitly demands a grasp of quantitative techniques. You've got to know when you'd use a choropleth map versus an isarithmic map. You have to understand statistical hypothesis testing, like when exactly do you apply a chi-square test instead of an ANOVA. And for physical geography, you need to calculate things like stream ordering, bifurcation ratios, and drainage density. It sounds like a lot, but trust me, it is incredibly logical once you actually sit down and practice it.
And finally, we arrive at our grand culmination, Bucket 5, the Geography of India. This is Unit 10, where we apply literally every concept we've talked about directly to the Indian subcontinent.
This unit is an absolute beast because it synthesizes the whole explainer. You have to map out India's distinct physiographic regions right alongside its natural resources. You need to understand the complex differences between the Himalayan and peninsular drainage systems, and, crucial point here, you have to master the mechanics of the Indian monsoon and jet streams. Once you've got the physical realities down, you connect them to human outcomes, like regional food security and agricultural yields from the Green Revolution.
On top of all that, you'll need to weigh India's internal development against massive external forces. Think of it like a giant balancing act. You're comparing internal regional planning, industrial policies, and transport networks with the overwhelming impact of globalization on the Indian economy. It's this beautiful, intricate dance between what's happening inside the country's borders and the pressures from the outside, not to mention external natural threats like Himalayan hazards and cyclones.
So, by restructuring the syllabus into these 5 buckets, the path to mastering the UGCNET exam becomes, well, a whole lot clearer, right? But as you use this roadmap for your prep, I want you to chew on this question. Looking at our rapidly changing world with shifting climates and totally realigning geopolitical borders, which of these geographic disciplines do you think will ultimately define our future? Dive into your studies, figure out your answer, and I will catch you in the next explainer.